So I wasn't meant to be the person to give this talk. And when they told me what it was on Monday, I thought, oh, that title's a bit punchy, and didn't think much about it. And then about half an hour ago, I got a message from one of our DevRels saying, that title's a bit punchy, maybe play down this idea. So I'm going to append, or prepend rather, maybe GraphQL without relay is not worth it, and we'll start there. So I'm Tom. I actually live in Barcelona, have since June. It's been really, really hot. So imagine when they told me to come here, how excited I was for the cool breezes of England. And since I got here, it's been like 3 degrees cooler back home than it is here. So it's going great. I work for Hasura. Hasura is a tool some of you might have seen. Here's a very ugly screenshot I took earlier. This has sort of already been introduced. Basically what it is, you have some data sources. You might have one, you might have a whole bunch. You tell us where they are, what the permissions model is, and we generate you an API. And that's in one sentence kind of how it all works. And we take care of things like, how do you join across data sources? How do you create kind of manually configured REST endpoints? How do you do federation with a lowercase f? All of these things are what we take care of. And I specifically work on some of the compilers that turn GraphQL queries into database queries, which means I am not a front-end developer. I never use this tool in the way that most of you probably do. I don't write JavaScript anymore. I have no idea what's going on with TypeScript, so enjoy whatever that is. I am simply here to talk about a thing we hated and then kind of changed our mind about. So this is a front end. In the beginning, the Hasura console was just graphical. There wasn't anything else to it. And then someone made the terrible error of building something quite helpful, which is a kind of database editor. And everyone said, we like that, so now we have to support it. And then we just kept going. So now we have things like permissions built into it. We have this UI. And the system grows and grows and grows. And then after that, we added some more things like actions, remote schemas, events. We're not going to talk about any of that today. Here's monitoring. It also looks complicated. I'm also not going to talk about this today. The point I want to make is there's a lot going on in the front end. And we wanted to build more on top of it very quickly and ran into some problems, which is at some point, we couldn't just keep hiring more developers and assuming it would get faster. So what do you do? If anyone's ever worked on any sort of parallel computing problem, you've got 2 choices. You either make it faster to do a thing or make it more parallelizable, or kind of do the thing more at once, if that makes any sort of sense. So how do we make development faster, and also how do we make each developer more independent and remove blockers from it? So whistling through it, there are a few options. There is the micro app approach, I think as made famous by Airbnb, which is effectively every page is an app. You can water this down to like every page is a kind of top or first level GraphQL component, but they all manage their own state. They are all entirely independent. If you make a change to one, it will not affect another, which is great because then everything is nicely independent. It's very clear to see who owns what. But what you're invariably going to end up doing is requesting a bunch of data on this page and then requesting it on that page and requesting it on that page. Because state isn't shared, you suddenly have to ask for everything every time you do anything. So that's not great. Transitions are clunky, either visually because it takes some time to load, or just technically because you are just requesting things you already know. And you've introduced at least one of the hardest problems in computer science, which is cache invalidation. Is if you try to solve this problem by caching things, when do you stop caching things? How do you know when to stop caching things? The other hardest problem is naming things, which I think this also introduces, but not strictly. So option 2 is you say everyone is going to own a UI component, or at least every UI component is going to have a named owner. And we're just going to put state all together. And then it is your job as the owner to figure out how you interact with that state. But otherwise, you're all separated. So now jurisdiction is quite clear. If I own this page or this button or this slideshow, it's mine. State is always consistent because there's only one. So if I update the state on this page, I know it's right on the other page because they're pointing at the same state. But you hit some pretty immediate people issues, I suppose, which is parents and childs might have different owners. Now jurisdiction's not so clear. How do I get state down to the child? Does it come through the parents? In which case, I am now depending on other people, and now we just have a sort of dependency tree. And yes, now shared state is everyone's problem. While we've divided up the components quite nicely and neatly, everyone now needs to care about how state works, and everyone needs to be careful not to step on each other's toes. So this is also something we didn't want to do. And so someone in the front-end team got very excited and said, why don't we try this thing, Relay, which has already been introduced, which is great. I don't need to talk too much about this. The idea is, and I'm going to butcher it because, again, not a front-end developer, you have a bunch of components that want data. And Relay is a thing that says, if all those things ask independently, I will kind of aggregate it into one query and make sure everything ends up routed to where it needs to go. It does this through a bunch of clever things with fragments. And effectively what it means is every component assumes it has independent state, and Relay takes care behind the scenes of making sure everyone is modifying and accessing that state without upsetting one another. So it's sort of independent state as an illusion on top of shared state. There is a Relay compiler. There's been a lot of work put into this, which is very good because it's more work we don't have to do. And the only thing you end up with that's potentially a problem is you end up with a big old GraphQL query which has a lot of, or sorry, a big old GraphQL request that has a lot of queries in it. But optimizing that is a problem for the server. The front end doesn't need to worry about that. So this would be great, right? This solves all our problems. Everyone can go about their merry ways. Except no one thought of this until we were quite a long way into it. And actually, we spent all this time building an API generator to make front-end development easier. And so when they said, what shall we build our front end on top of? Someone said, REST APIs. So we completely ignored the thing we'd spent years developing and just built something else instead, which has so many problems, it merits its own talk. So we didn't care about Relay when we built the console, and so we didn't have any customers for Relay. In fact, the only bit of Relay we originally built was for a proof of concept for this poor engineer to prove to us that it might be useful. And because we didn't do a very good job of that, didn't get a good chance to prove it was useful. So in the current version of Hasura, the one we talk about when we say Hasura, the only thing that supports Relay is data that comes directly from tables. So you say, here's my database, and we say, we'll make some GraphQL queries for each table. This is fine. We provide global node.ids for tables. Everything works fine. And then we started adding those other features I said I wouldn't talk about, which also add entities to the GraphQL schema. And we didn't add Relay nodes to those because we in the back end thought no one cared about Relay, not realizing that no one uses it because we haven't built it. And so we don't build it, so no one uses it, and we never get anywhere. So we didn't try very hard to kind of improve that developer experience at all. And what it has meant is, as time has gone on and Relay has kind of proven itself to be a useful thing, we've found people saying things like stuff that should be very, very easy is actually really hard because it just wasn't a concern we had. So the next step is really, now we've decided it's a very useful thing to have. It's obviously very good. It solves our use case. It actually solved our use case before, but we're paying attention this time. What do we do about it? And so it just so happens we're about to launch a brand new version of Hasura, which we're calling the Data Delivery Network, which I think, do I have a, no, I don't have a slide yet. But basically, the Data Delivery Network is a kind of full stack redesign of how Hasura works. We learned a lot of lessons and iterated on code for a very long time. And in the process, it got unwieldy. And there are things we don't particularly like. There are things we've realized in hindsight are really just specializations of the same concept. So this is in some ways a simplification of the whole system, which is great because now we have an opportunity to try new things and we can experiment and we can go back through all the things we thought we should have done before and try them out. So we came up with some rules for ourselves. The first is, let's build our front end using Relay. And instead of building a REST API, let's run an instance of Hasura that the front end talks to. So now we have to use Hasura with Relay. So now if it's rubbish, it'll annoy us and we'll fix it. We've sort of, you know, put ourselves in the way somewhat. So we are we're forced to fix the problems because if we have problems in our relay support, it's bad for us as well, which I thought was quite good. We'll generate IDs for everything, including things without a primary key. So the reason we only supported tables is because tables usually have a primary key, which makes it very easy to generate globally unique IDs. You just use the primary key. Lots of things don't, and it was just a bit too awkward for us to put in V2, but in V3 we've kind of started as a foundation. Everything has to have a way to be hashed such that it can be identified. So this means that everything you have, if you have tables in your database, views in your database, stored procedures that mutate something that you can read in your database, remote schemas, REST API actions, all of these things are effectively identical to tables. There's no difference between them in the end user API. They all work with Relay. It's sort of, it's a much simpler structure to work with as an end user. So yes, the Hasura DDN, or V3 as we call it internally. We call it a super graph of all data sources, which is a very fancy way of saying if I have 5 databases, I can join from any database to any database. And the Hasura engine is the thing that bothers to work out how to do that efficiently, avoid things like the n+1 problem. All of these things are dealt with by a central engine that then takes that query plan and says, I need to run this on this database. So it passes it to a special sort of plugin, and then this on this database. And it's all done separately and then aggregated at the end. But all this is handled by the central engine. If you have a database like, say, Neo4j, and you think it would be good if this worked with Hasura, you can just build a connector. And then not only does it work with Hasura, but you can join across any database you like. And most importantly for this talk, it fully supports Relay. We've actually, from first commit, we've really stuck to this. And as I say, our own internal tooling on top of Hasura V3 is built with Relay. So definitely works, at least for us. So I'm trying to condense this as much as I can. There is a blog post that basically goes through everything I just said, but with nicer pictures. And this is our sort of fancy marketing URL that basically talks through what I've said here today and the other features I haven't had time to talk about, like open telemetry, which is someone much cleverer than me has dealt with all that, so I don't know how it works, but it looks very good. And that is it. Thank you very much.